Hello everybody, you're welcome to this video. In this video, I'll be discussing the process diagram um, that you may encounter or you may come across when taking the academic Ielts task 1 for the writing section. A lot of people practice how to summarize the tables, the graphs, and maps, but a few people or most people tend to neglect the process diagram, and as simple as it may seem, it could be tricky at times. So in this video, I'll talk about the process diagram, um, how to structure it, the different ways to begin, just basically how to write it. And I'll be giving one example. I'll be using this, which is from the Baron's IELTS textbook. It should be the model test 2. You can always have access to it. It's on page 356. But before we practice, let's do a background, or let's take a look at some basic things that we should know before we start practicing. Now, basically, the process diagram usually shows how something is made or produced. For instance, it could be how cement is made, or how plastics are recycled, or how something works in stages. So it could be how something is made or produced, how you know something works in stages. For instance, the water cycle, how it works. It could be a natural process, maybe the life cycle of a butterfly. But the point is, the recurring theme is that there's usually a process involved. There's usually a process involved. I'm trying to write, but looks like my pen's battery is a bit low. But basically, there's a process involved when you, you know, when you encounter this question. So the first thing I mentioned was um, how something is made or produced. It could be how something works, in stages, and it could be, a natural process. At times, you could contain a diagram that where you see like arrows that indicate what comes next and what came before. It could be just something that shows stages or sequence. It could be bullet points, but in most cases, it's arrows. Now, what do you want to do when you come across this kind of question? Firstly, you want to describe what happens. You want to describe what happens. Also, you want to follow a chronological order. Follow chronological order. In other words, you're describing in the order of the stages. You're not going to scatter it. Then you want to highlight the beginning and the end, because those are key stages. Now, this is what you want to do when writing. Sorry, I should be using my pen, but um, I did not expect that my battery will be low for my pen. Now, when you're writing, you want to have 4 paragraphs. Excuse me. You want to have 4 paragraphs. Um, the first paragraph will be the introduction, and then you have paragraph 2, then paragraph 3, and then paragraph 4. Remember, um, paragraph 4 is the conclusion. Also, remember that it's supposed to be um, a minimum of 150 words, which means you're not expected to write a lot of words. So you want to stay within the 150, 180 range. Writing 200 words is not terrible, but you want to stay within the range of 150 and 180. Definitely, you will not be penalized for writing more than a 150, but definitely you do not want to write less than 150. Now let's proceed. So you're going to have 4 paragraphs, or at least 4 paragraphs. You have paragraph 1, which is the introduction. For instance, just something basic like diagram shows how paper is recycled, or the diagram illustrates illustrates should be double L, yeah, illustrates the process involved in recycling paper. Something very basic. Then, after your introduction, you want to have an overview. In the overview, you want to mention the number of stages. The number of stages. Um, you want to mention this beginning of the process and the end of the process. You also want to mention the kind of process. Is it a linear process? Is it cyclical? For instance, the water cycle is cyclical. The process of making cheese is linear. Now, you could say overall, some people choose to have this as a second paragraph, but I like to have it in my first paragraph. So my first paragraph is not too short. Overall, comma, the process consists of 6 stages. I recommend that whenever you're writing numbers less than 10, you write it in words. When it's more than 10, you can write it in digits. So overall, the process consists of 6 stages. Remember what I said. You want to start at the end of the process. So that this you want to mention the start and the end of the process. So you can say beginning with the collection of used paper and ending with the production of new paper. Now, remember I said something about being cyclical or linear. If it was cyclical, you could say that overall, it is a cyclical process that consists of 6 stages. You understand? Like adding that additional detail makes your work read better. Right? Now, when you're done with that, you now want to proceed to talk about the first half of the process. The first half of the process. This is where you want to use things like firstly, initially, um, um, at the first stage, next, subsequently. Transition words or signal words that show sequence because you're describing stages, and using words that indicate sequence helps you a lot. So like, now remember we're talking about the process of recycling paper. So let's stay on topic. I could say to start with that this shows beginning. I could say initially. I could say firstly. I don't want to use words that people would use frequently or all the time. So I don't want to use firstly. So I could say to start with, used paper. Remember, you'll be given a diagram, so I'm just writing from the top of my head. Used paper is collected from different homes and companies. So this is probably the first stage I saw. Remember, I said we should talk about the first half of the process rather. Let's imagine there are four stages in the process. You can mention two in paragraph two, and the remaining two in paragraph three. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Basically, it's just to divide the processes into two and discuss them in separate paragraphs. I believe that makes sense. So to start with, used paper is collected from different homes and companies. Before, you see that's in that sequence word, before being transported to a recycling facility. So that's like two stages in the process. At the plant, so I don't want to say facility again, so I'm using a synonym. At the plant, the paper is sorted according to their different types and shredded into smaller pieces. That's enough for a paragraph. So we've mentioned the fact that the papers are collected from different places and then taken to a recycling facility, and then they are taken at that facility. They are sorted into their different types and then shredded into smaller pieces. Then the next paragraph talks about the second half of the processes. So in this paragraph, we want to describe the remaining stages until the final stage. So we can say subsequently, which means after then or following. Subsequently, the shredded paper, you want to make sure your work is connected because we just talked about shredded paper. We ended with shredded paper in the previous paragraph. So we can say subsequently, shredded paper is mixed with water and chemicals to form pulp. The pulp is then cleaned to remove any impurities. Finally, the purified pulp. Are you seeing the way it is linked? I talked about pulp, then I now proceeded to start with pulp again. Finally, the purified pulp is pressed and dried to produce new sheets of paper. So I recommend ending with an overview. All in all, there are how many stages did you mention? Let's say one, two, three. We mentioned three in each paragraph. So all in all, there are 6 stages. Or all in all, The diagram mentions six stages in recycling paper. That's all. Task one is so easy, and writing a a summary of a process is so easy. So let's read it together. The diagram illustrates the process involved in recycling paper. Overall, it is a clinical process that consists of six stages, beginning with the collection of used paper and ending with the production of new paper. To start with, used paper is collected from different homes and companies. Before being transported to a recycling facility, you see, that's just a continuation. At the plant, the paper is sorted according to their different types and shredded into smaller pieces. Paragraph 3. Subsequently, the shredded paper is mixed with water and chemicals to form pulp. That's why it's good to read through your work so you notice any error you might have made. The pulp is then cleaned to remove any impurities. Finally, the purified pulp is pressed and dried to produce new sheets of paper. All in all, the diagram mentions six stages in recycling paper. So I'll do it. I'll repeat what I've said before. Your introduction should basically repeat, the question. Should repeat the exact thing the questioner expects you to do. You want to describe what happens. You want to follow a chronological order, and you want to highlight the beginning and the end. That's for the introduction. Then your paragraph should just talk about each. Should just divide the processes or the stages into half. If it is 6, 3, 3. If it is 4, 2, 2. If it is 5, you can have three first and two. So that's quite simple. Now that thing is you don't want to spend too long explaining. Don't. I'm not saying you should not explain, but don't give your opinion. Don't give your opinion. Just say what you can see. Now let's do another question, a question, and then we can proceed. So this is a sample question. I'm trying to make you see the whole thing. It says the diagram below shows the steps in the process of manufacturing yogurt. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons relevant. If you've been practicing for task one, you know that this last line is the same in every task one question. Right? So now, as you can see, there are 7 stages. And the heading there says manufacturing yogurt. The first thing you want to do is understand the labels. In number 1, we see milk in a pot. And then you see the milk is being boiled at 90 degrees Celsius or 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and you to boil for 30 minutes. If you boil for longer, you will have something thicker, right? Then we have paragraph 2. You wait for the milk that you have boiled to cool to 44 degrees Celsius or 112 degrees Fahrenheit. Once it has cooled, we pour what into it? Let's see, yogurt what? Starter, which is a live bacteria, into the milk. Then you wait for it to cool again for 4 hours. When it's at 37 degrees centigrade, which is 100 degrees Fahrenheit, you put it in the fridge. This is a fridge, not a freezer. It's not specifically mentioned how long it should be in the fridge for. So let's refrain from, said anything about putting it in the fridge. Number six, you to add sugar, and from what I can see there, fruits. It could for it says I think that's a those are three pieces of strawberry. Number seven, you pour the yogurt, the result into buckets or into cups, and then they are shipped to wherever it is needed. So what do we do? Let's break the processes into two rather. We can say 1 to 4 will be one paragraph, 5 to 7 will be another paragraph. Do you understand? So now let's write our introduction. We'll use the same document. Same document. We'll start with our introduction. Let's make this bigger so we have no difficulties when writing. So the overall, or sorry, the introduction. The diagram, remember, just repeat the question. Illustrates. You would mention the number of steps, even if the question does not mention it. You can see it illustrates 7 steps involved in the production of yogurt from milk. Remember what I said? You want to mention the beginning and the end. So you can say the process begins with the heating of milk and ends with the packaging and distribution of the finished yogurt. Now you can choose to mention all 7 steps if you wish. I did not say explain, I said mention. That's in introduction. You can say the procedure involves heating. That was the first thing, right? Heating, cooling, fermentation. Fermentation just means you wait for it. You added the live yeast or bacteria to make it, ferment. Fermentation, refrigeration, and the addition of flavor or flavoring ingredients. That's the sugar and the fruits. So let's write our paragraph 2, which will be the first half of the process. We said the first 4. So initially, milk is heated to a temperature of 90 degrees. I believe it's 90 degrees centigrade. You could put in bracket 200 since it was mentioned. It was mentioned in the diagram, so let's just mention it. And kept. And kept at this temperature for approximately 30 minutes. You don't have to write like this. You could say the milk is boiled for 30 minutes, then you mention the temperature. So you don't have to use my words. You don't have to write like me. But the point is mention these key things. The milk is then cooled to around 44 degrees centigrade or Celsius. I don't know what it is. 112 believe it was degrees as well, Fahrenheit. Full stop. Once the milk once the milk um has cooled, I think the next step is the live bacteria was added. Live bacteria are added to it to begin begin the fermentation process. So we can stop paragraph 2 here because we don't want our paragraphs to become too long. 4 or 5 lines is enough, or 3 or 4 safe. Now the next step, paragraph 3. In the next stage, the yogurt is placed in a refrigerator. We're not told how long, so let's refrain from saying how long. The refrigerator to cool, obviously. Following this, I don't want to use subsequently. Following this, sugar and fruit may be added to improve the flavor. So you see, it is a bit shorter because it is uneven. We have 4 and 3. So we now mention the last stage. Finally, the yogurt is poured into small containers. You could call them bowls, you call them cups, but I think that I just want to say containers to be safe. After which it is transported by truck. Mention the details. Transported by truck for distribution and sale. Now, you could end with a conclusion like this. Overall, the diagram shows 7 steps involved in transforming milk into yogurt for distribution. Let's say before distribution. So yeah, that's it. Let's read together. The diagram illustrates 7 steps involved in the production of yogurt from milk. That's just rewriting the question basically. Then an overview that mentions the exact things you'll be talking about later on. The process begins with the heating of milk and ends with the packaging and distribution of the finished yogurt. The process begins with the heating of milk and ends with the packaging and distribution of the finished yogurt. The procedure involves heating, cooling, fermentation, refrigeration, and addition of flavoring ingredients. Initially, milk is heated to a temperature of 90 degrees Celsius. and kept at this temperature for approximately 30 minutes. The milk is then cooled to around 44 degrees Celsius. Once the milk has cooled, live bacteria are added to begin the fermentation process. In the next stage, the yogurt is placed in the refrigerator to cool. Following this, sugar and fruit may be added to improve the flavor. Finally, the yogurt is poured into small containers, after which it is transported by truck for distribution and sale. Overall, the diagram shows 7 steps involved in transforming milk into yogurt before distribution. So that's it. Um, it's quite easy if you just follow the steps. All right. So now we've come to the end of the video. Um, See you in the next one. Bye bye.